so nice to be together again
Yes.
after all this time. We see each other regularly anyway at Columbia. But what we're going to talk about today is the experience we had as part of Sharing Cultures in South Africa. And since the two of you were the first faculty members from Columbia to be involved with this, I'd like to hear your response about that experience. It's been a while, but if you could share with us a little about what you saw the value of that culture, of that project for you and the others who are participating in it. Any one of you wants to start?
I'll start. So much of the value for me was personal. I think there was a lot of educational value. I think it also affected my teaching, but it was a wonderful personal experience, and I think that probably the thing that was most educational for me was that I learned a lot about my white privilege that I didn't know. I became aware of white privilege in a way that I hadn't been aware of it before the project, so that was one of the biggest things for me.
Okay. That didn't happen to you, George.
Oh, in a way it did.
Okay.
In a way it did. Well, what it did for me really was to expand my notions of the world. You know, to go that far from home and to be that far away just expands your consciousness about how big the world is. I also think that it also made me realize my privileges as a black man. I often tell people that I come away from this experience feeling that there are no ghettos in America after being in the townships, after experiencing the townships, after experiencing the density, the population density, how folks made do with what they had. And I realized that I had a level of materiality that far exceeded a lot of black people that lived in those parts of the world. But in another way, I gained a real deep sense of problem solving, in a way, with the whole project. Especially around organizing the reciprocal back and forth of the partners on the other side, and
the distance, using the technology, lots of problems.
Yeah,
lots of problems.
we saw that.
But what I'm hearing from both of you is that the experience highlighted your privilege and the idea of the division between those who have and those who have not. Another thing I'd like to have you hear from you is how you felt Sharing Cultures could serve the participants in terms of helping them understand each other. What remembrances do you have about that, or what ideas come to mind when you think about how Sharing Cultures can help promote understanding of the other?
Do you want to start this?
No, please.
I learned a lot about what teaching conditions are like for faculty members in other places. I also wasn't aware of how much privilege I have as a faculty member here. I take for granted that my students can use computer labs. I take for granted that I will receive a certain level of support. I take for granted that my chairperson and my administrators value the projects that I undertake. I thought that that our colleagues in South Africa had to work harder to do the same things that George and I were doing in our classrooms. I felt that they both had to work a lot harder, that there were many more institutional obstacles to their participation. I felt that institutionally I had all the support that I needed to participate in the project, but I became aware that it's much harder for faculty in other places. So I think I lost some of my sense that faculty everywhere work under the same conditions. So I have more appreciation for what faculty in other places do experience.
Okay.
That was similar, but for me, drilling down into that, I saw some similarities between the two cultures in lots of ways. But I reckon that, I mean, I always thought that the United States was much further along than the Afrikaners and that all those other cultural groups, the Xhosa and the Zulus and the Indians, the Asians, the Coloreds, which was complicated for me. But I felt that there was a kind of discourse up on top, and a discourse that needed to go down further, and I felt that being there allowed me to see how they were doing that, how they were really working to solve some of the cultural problems, because they were not too long from 1994, 1995. And I was always comparing how far along the resolution of the great conflicts between the races and the cultures, and how in the United States we were much further along, but we still had such a ways to go. And I saw that reflected in the institutional setup of the University of Port Elizabeth. Yeah.
Now it's renamed Nelson Mandela. Right?
Yeah. That, you know, just by the way that the university was, just the architecture of it, the way it was set up, the big rooms had a sort of ministerial magistrate kind of setting, and that was illuminating for me in a way.
So what both of you have been talking about is how you personally experienced the project with your colleagues and in the environment being in South Africa. I'd like to talk a little bit about what you observed about the students who are participating. Because we're talking about lots of different cultures here, the American students and the South African students, and then the divide among our American students, and the divide within the South African group, because there were many subgroups in each of them. So it's been a while, I know, since you've been actively involved in it, but did something come to mind about how you saw the students understanding each other in a different way as a result of this program, or understanding themselves?
Well, I'll jump on this one, you know, because I actually had an opportunity to make two trips, and so my and I'm conflating the two just a bit. I really realize, but I think it's okay. And I have a personal story. Like the last time that I went, I met students who really wanted to know in detail what American students were like what they felt, what they wanted. I also had a sense that the South African students, a lot like, I compare them to recent immigrants who really wanted to get at it, who had a serious intent of using their opportunity to get at it, you know, to make a difference, to make a contribution. And at the bottom of it was the notion of, I'm going to build myself up. I'm in the process of building myself up, which when I compare that to students in the United States is a different kind of thing.
I thought that sharing cultures would be easier than it was. I naively expected that my students would all be very excited that they would be interacting with South African students. I thought that the two sets of students would be equally excited about talking with each other, and that they would be very happy to do it and that it would be easy. I was surprised to discover how little my students knew about South Africa. I was surprised by that. it's such a model, it's a famous model of nonviolent revolution, and so it's so famous among a number of people that I know. And I just thought that many students would know the story of the fall of apartheid in South Africa, but they didn't. And they didn't immediately appreciate what a fabulous opportunity it was to interact with other South African students. And they were more cautious, skeptical, and hostile than I expected. Not overtly hostile, but the things that we would talk about in class surprised me sometimes. They would be surprised by remarks that their South African counterparts made. They made fun of the music that some of their South African student colleagues listened to. I was surprised by the amount of work that I had to do to actually facilitate a more friendly cultural sharing, and I think part of that had to do with my underestimating how the technological platform would mediate that. I had to do a lot to make the students perceive their South African peers as real